Hello, everyone. Welcome to our February 2022 Becky's Anonymous live stream. So excited to be here with you all, and especially to be here with Nicole, who's a progressive grassroots organizer who's here to help update us on the urgent stuff that's going on around reproductive justice movements and why now is the time for us as white women to step up in support of the people who are doing the work to defend our bodily autonomy. And so super excited to have Nicole here, who's going to walk through a lot of that. We're going to share, as always, our list of action items that Nicole has provided a bunch of great ones to share with you all. So we'll highlight those. I want to highlight that next month, we're going to be doing our second part on this topic, where we're going to be focusing on Black maternity health and how, again, we can support Black women who are leading the fight for reproductive justice. But I want to welcome you, Nicole. Thanks so much for being here, and would love to just start hearing a little bit about what's brought you to this movement and why you're so passionate about discussing this.
Sure. Thank you so much. I'm really happy to be here. I always feel like I was kind of born into this work. My mom has been really active in reproductive access and care and justice for even before Roe. She was involved with the Amherst Women's Liberation, Abortion, and Birth Control group before abortion was legal in this country. She's a social worker and was really involved in that way. So I think in the beginning, probably in my 20s, it was mostly around like the lobbying and the political aspect of abortion through organizations like NARAL. And it really wasn't until I'd say around 2016, I became involved with an abortion fund in New York City, and I was trained to do intake work. And that's talking to people who are calling because they need financial assistance with their abortion. And it was the first time, that was when I was in my 30s, I was really, even though I knew I was for abortion rights, I was pro-abortion, I had never really, because of a lot of my privilege, because of my class privilege, because of my race privilege, I had never encountered some of the barriers that people do when trying to get healthcare. And so the many reasons that people would call into an abortion fund for assistance, it really kind of made me confront some of my own biases about the work and about why people need this and why it's so important. And so I think even since then, that 6 years, it's really, along with how much the work has grown because of all the increased barriers that have been put in place for people to access abortion care. I think it's kind of helped me grow and develop how I think about this work and why it's so important, and why there is no kind of economic justice, no racial justice, no just justice if people can't make decisions about when and where and how to start a family. So it's all interconnected.
Thanks so much, Nicole. And that, I want to say Happy Love Day to you today. And also just want to highlight that's why we're talking about this issue is how we're showing love to all those people that you mentioned, that you've gotten some firsthand knowledge of what people face when it comes to this issue. So thank you. So we're going to dive into reproductive justice. What do we mean by reproductive justice? You helped share with us this great organization, Sister Song, which was founded by Loretta Ross. And just wanted to share a quote from Loretta Ross. And if you could share a little bit after the quote, just kind of what is Sister Song, what is their work? And then we'll get more into this current moment of reproductive justice. So this is a quote from Loretta Ross, founder of Sister Song. What is reproductive justice? The right to have a child, the right to not have a child, and the right to raise your children. Everyone should have that. It's not that hard to explain. It's just hard as hell to achieve.
Yeah, I mean, it's all right there. And, reproductive justice is something that was a term that was really founded by Loretta Ross and the work that Sister Song has done. They're a Southern-based organization, women of color collective coming together to do this work. And I think what is so important about Sister Song and the work they do is that it's such a good example of how we should be listening to people who are doing the work. And so often the people who are doing the work are women of color, are Black women. And it's so important to show up and listen and see how we can be supporting that work. And again, as I, kind of said before, this is all interconnected. It's not you can't have people can't make decisions about when to have families. That means they're not being able to make decisions about their own finances, their future, and our healthcare systems are impacted by racism. So it's all connected. And so I think without reproductive justice, we miss all of those parts that really come together, and why this work is so important to support.
So with it being all connected and it's so hard, it's so important for us to be working on this. Can you tell us a little bit more why Loretta Ross says it's hard as hell to achieve? Why particularly in this moment is it so hard to achieve? And how we're even losing, some of the things that we've already achieved.
Yeah, I think that what's important to understand is that this isn't all happening just in this last year. This isn't all happening just because of our last president. This has been, the anti-abortion movement really grew out of the segregated South. It grew out of when segregation started to end, people were mad and wanted a different way to control Black and brown bodies. And so this is a continuation of that. And so the last decades from Roe becoming legal, have been filled with ways to put up more and more barriers for people who are already struggling to get health care, to get childcare, and are already, because of systemic racism and inequities, working to make ends meet, just putting up more and more barriers. So it's hard because we're not just coming up against these more recent restrictions. This is decades in the making. And a lot of it is because of not listening to Black people, not listening to people who were on the ground who this was kind of impacting, and often centering white women in the work and white women in the abortion world at the real loss of, kind of what was really happening. Hope that answers your question kind of about but I think that's, we can't separate white supremacy from what is happening now, right? Like this is, again, it's just a further attempt to criminalize and surveil and control people's bodies, and most specifically Black and brown people who are having babies, because that is who these laws end up mostly hindering and preventing them and putting up barriers to them getting care. And not just abortion care, right? Like getting birth control, having access to food for their family. Like there's all sorts of different things that this impacts for people.
So can you share like a little bit more on that point of kind of how do we, here at Becky's Anonymous, we're trying to end white supremacy. How do we start thinking about reproductive justice really as a core element of what we're doing, and not just kind of this side thing or footnote, or, just curious kind of how do we further integrate it kind of into this broader view of white supremacy?
Absolutely. Because it's if people don't have the ability to make decisions about when and where to have children, to raise children in their life, being forced to have children when they do not, what that really means for people in their lives. For me, it's sometimes I think I have a hard time explaining why it is, because it just feels to me such a fundamental human right that people have decisions about when they are going to have children, and when they are going to, not to mention all of the dangers that are, that come up for people when they are pregnant and have chosen to be pregnant. You know, it's not like it's necessarily super easy to be pregnant, to give birth, to then raise children. Like, that's just so much. And again, I think it's really not about life, right, for babies. That's not what it's about, at least I think for the anti-abortion faction. It is about control, and it's about criminalization, right? Like, the people who are going to be impacted, the people who are impacted by these restrictions, by these laws, are people who already are so stigmatized by these systems of oppression, and are already living under these systems of oppression. This just makes it worse. And it's just, again, another way to criminalize healthcare. I mean, it's criminalizing healthcare. You know, the idea that you could call the police because someone has had an abortion. I feel like the last thing we need, we've been talking about this a lot, is more people calling the police on their community members. And so, like, how does that feel like a good idea? And who will that mostly impact? You know, who are the people people will call the police on, right? I think even though Roe has been legal, abortion has been legal for so long, just because something is legal doesn't mean it's accessible for everyone. So, you know, even though you and I might most likely will still be able to access abortion and other sorts of reproductive health care, even if Roe were to be overturned, and most likely it is going to be overturned, that is not the case for everyone. And it's not about a white saviorism sense. It's about, you know, again, if someone is not free, we are all not free. And I'm badly paraphrasing Audre Lorde, but, you know, that idea that it's all connected. And so, like, I just don't see how you can say someone says they care about racial justice when they want to control the decisions that a Black woman makes about her body when it comes to having children. To me, it doesn't line up.
And I think this question about kind of that calling the police, what is that really about, when we know very well that just makes abortions more dangerous? It doesn't actually change, you know, kind of whether people get them or not.
Right. And also, abortions are one of the safest medical procedures that exist. And so, right, a lot of this and a lot of the misinformation we've been fed, a lot of the kind of just the lies that we've been told perpetuate these myths about what abortion is, how safe it is, how, you know, how as if people in the United States don't believe in abortion. I think at this point, 77% of Americans believe that Roe v. Wade should be upheld. You know, that's a huge majority. Some of the other, you know, kinds of interesting things too is that 1 in 4 people will have an abortion by age 45. 60% of abortions are obtained by patients who have had at least one birth, right? Like, we've been sold the many lies, and I don't even want to repeat what they are, because I don't think we should repeat the lies that we were told about who has abortions and how, but like, it's a very safe medical procedure. And yet, you know, with laws that have been added in the last decade or so to restrict the kinds of restrictions put on clinics that provide abortions, the kind of admitting privileges, their doctor's needs, all of these things are not, they say they are to make it safer for people getting abortion. It's not. It's to create barriers so that it's harder and harder and harder for people to access abortions and to make decisions about their lives and their futures.
So, Nicole, I think our first action step is to say abortion, right? And I think, and I will just say personally, you know, I've really been grateful for the conversations that we've been having, because it's really exposed for me what's an area that I need personally to get much better at talking about. But what it has been wonderful about talking to you is that we have all these resources to help ourselves learn how to accurately talk about this. And I think that's, you know, this is what we're doing at Becky's Anonymous, is how do we help each other do exactly that and open that conversation. So let's start with that first action step and into that. Some of the things that get in our way of saying abortion, of talking about it. So just want to, is there anything else that?
Yeah, and I think we'll get it wrong, right? Like I think, and again, a lot of this is only, I know I was very much sometimes raised with the like abortion safe, legal, and rare, or whatever that nonsense was, as if that someone should only have it in the rarest of instances, and all of this stuff to kind of make it seem like it was something bad, and it's not. It's very often a very useful healthcare procedure. And so I think then we kind of get in this, okay, we're going to call it a procedure, we're going to call it healthcare, and it is all of those things. But I think by not saying abortion, we have let anti-abortion folks win in that. The other thing I've been thinking about a lot recently, and I cannot take credit for this, and I am now completely forgetting where I first saw mention of it, but this whole idea of decision versus choice. We used to talk about this, it's my choice, not his, it's my, that whole thing. And I posters that I've made with that. But a lot of the people who are impacted by these laws, it's not about a choice. They don't have the same choices that everyone has. It's a decision. It's a decision that they are making. It's not a like, oh, out of these 5 things, it's a decision. Mm-hmm. And so I've been trying to use the word decision more. I've also been trying to use more gender inclusive language around abortion. Again, as because of my race and class, I was very much raised as like, this is a women's issue. All sorts of folks have abortions. And so I really try to use more kind of gender inclusive language when I am talking about abortions. And I don't feel like people should have to apologize. Again, this was stuff that I when I started doing intake and talking to more people who are having abortions, it's like, it shouldn't be an issue if someone's had one already. It shouldn't be an issue if someone has kids already. And again, you might have your own feelings and beliefs about that, but I think we've all seen in the last couple of years, especially what happens when we infringe our beliefs onto someone else's decision about their own bodily autonomy. And so those are just some of the language things I try to use. We're still all going to make mistakes and learn, and maybe in 10 years it'll be entirely different. And that's okay. That's okay. That's kind of what learning and growing is about. So that's some of the ways. And again, I think just more abortion. The last sign I made for a protest was, I think, abortion free and on demand. And I think that feels a little edgy, but it shouldn't be. Like, that's how we should think about healthcare. If someone needs an abortion, they should be able to get it at the time they want it and need it and have requested it and have had the conversation with a doctor without a doctor infringing their own beliefs onto them. And it should be free, because I also think that healthcare should be free. So that's a big thing. The one thing, this wasn't entirely what you asked me, but I wanted to make sure we talked about it, was I also just don't think folks sometimes understand the logistics around abortions and with the cost of that, right? We don't talk about the cost. We're starting to talk more about the cost of healthcare, but an abortion usually up to 13 weeks will be around $600 to $700, depending on the state you're in. That does not include getting to the appointment. That does not include time off from work that you might need to take. And that's up to 13 weeks. After that, it can be much more expensive. And you are required to pay that at the time of the appointment. You are not billed later, like many healthcare procedures. You need that day somehow. Credit card, cash, your insurance. Many insurances do not cover abortions. Many insurances have high deductibles that, someone might not be able to, their deductible might be $1,500, and they're not able to make that in order to then get the abortion. Also, since 1976, we have had something called the Hyde Amendment. And the Hyde Amendment basically makes it so that no federal dollars go to fund abortions. So if you are on any sort of federal insurance, Medicaid, or if you are working in any sort of federal job, if you are in the military, if you are an Indigenous person on Indigenous land, which we all are, but that is often how your health insurance, it's a federal health insurance, your insurance does not cover an abortion. That is a ton of people that impacts. I mean, sometimes I wish we could choose where, and I would love my tax dollars to not pay for war, but I'm not usually given that choice. And so it's really just ridiculous how we have been like, no, but for this thing, federal tax dollars will not cover it. And that impacts a ton of people. And so, you know, again, this is why this is all connected to economic justice, and why, again, we have already put so many barriers in place for people who are already struggling to get that kind of care.
So I just want to plug we're going to send with our action steps. We have some discussion guides that include a lot of, you know, some of the statistics, some of the terminology you're using, as well as a lot of that framing that you're really helping us kind of refocus ourselves in. So thank you for that. And to y'all out there in Becky's Anonymous, look out for that stuff that you can start practicing with. And also just want to plug our Grow Circle this Wednesday, which you're often in, where that's exactly the point, is to kind of take these things that we're learning and dive deeper into them and reflect on them. So thank you. And just want to invite everyone to join us Wednesday so we can dive even deeper into this discussion. I want to, you know, touch on one of our action steps related to this is fund abortions. So thank you for sharing that. Thank you for describing kind of what does that mean? Why is that an important part of this? We're going to share with our action steps some great ways that you all can plug into helping fund abortions in a good way. We're particularly highlighting the National Network of Abortion Funds, where if you become a member, then you receive your T-shirt with the great quote, "Everyone loves somebody who's had an abortion," which is, of course, kind of our theme for today is on this Happy Love Day, thinking about all of those people in our life and how we're standing with them and future people who, like you said, need to make that decision.
Yeah, abortion funds are just doing wonderful work. And I'm sure maybe Lee, you're going to say this, but you know, if you go to one of the links we will send for the National Network of Abortion Funds, you can see all of the abortion funds by state. So you can choose to give to your local fund. You can choose to give to a fund that is in one of the states that is being more pressured right now by these restrictions, like Texas and Mississippi and Alabama. And so, you know, that is also, I think, really important, because that money is being directly used to help people access abortions. Some of the funds as well, if you go to their pages, they will talk about other kinds of assistance they offer as well. There are some funds that do abortion doula work, which is something that I think is really wonderful and really amazing. There is a really great fund in Indiana that I know also has like a resource store that they offer diapers and childcare and tampons and other things, like this whole full spectrum of reproductive health care. And so it's really, really wonderful what some of these funds are doing. Many of them volunteer only. But I think that's important too. Often when white women, I think, talk about getting involved in this work, there is a sense to reinvent the wheel, and the wheel has already been going. There's another really wonderful organization called the Bridget Alliance, which I worked with a lot when I was doing intake in New York City. They help get folks to where they need to be for abortions, whether it's via transportation, helping setting them up to stay somewhere, a hotel, things like that. Because again, it's so much more sometimes than just whatever the abortion costs. So there's some really great organizations doing that work. And again, I know kind of include you with some other links. Also, something that I don't know if folks always know is that about 2 out of 3 people in the US who have had an abortion have had at an independent clinic. And so I know we'll include the link to the abortion care providers, because a lot of that work is happening at independent clinics that don't sometimes have some of the resources that larger ones do. So yeah, there are a lot of great places to either give your money to and or your time. A lot of these organizations are looking for volunteers. I'm now involved with the fund out here in Western Mass, and they are always looking for volunteers, often to do help with intake, but also for other things as well. So that is always, something worthwhile to check with your local fund and see if they are training volunteers.
No, that really helps. I wonder if you could talk a little bit more, because, funding these networks, funding these places, as you described, right, is funding a movement. And I really appreciate your kind of historical memory with the movement. And I was wondering if you could just touch on, how do you see this movement, resiliency? How would you describe it? And kind of what can we learn from it just in general, and kind of how we build movements and sustain? I mean, what do
Yeah.
you see movement?
I mean, I think all movements are kind of also living within the systems we're all living in, right? So I know there's been some really kind of looking inward right now into some reproductive justice movements in terms of systemic racism, in terms of who gets to lead these movements, who gets money, who doesn't, again, who do we kind of listen to? And I think, unfortunately, what we might see more of, just because we are seeing this kind of explosion